to say thanks for coming out and supporting Dave, Crance, and myself. I'm going to talk for a little bit, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk a little bit about his campaign. And at the very end, we'll do some question and answers. So if you got any questions for me, please feel free to save it till the end. That way we can ensure that you all stay here in the room, right? So that ensures a captive audience. My name is Chase Oliver. I'm a candidate for president with the Libertarian Party, and I'm traveling through Virginia today to ask for your support and for your vote. I want to be an alternative to Donald Trump and Joe Biden 2.0 in our election. Because right now, that's probably what we're going to be getting from the two-party system. And voters are dissatisfied with that choice. And so I want to be an alternative that people can feel good about voting for. I want to tell you a little bit about my background, a little bit about my policy, and why I'm here in Virginia. So my background is this. I am a guy who got into work. My education is the School of Life. I did a couple years at online college, but really, I spent 13 years in the restaurant industry. I started out as a dishwasher, and I worked my way up being a consultant to the industry to where I was helping advise new entrepreneurs and new chefs on opening up their business. From there, I moved into corporate logistics, where I learned the importance of moving goods from A to B and how important and interconnected the world is through trade. In that process, I've also been an activist my entire adult life. I started out as an anti-war activist because 9/11 happened when I was in school. I saw friends of mine getting sent to the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and I opposed those actions, and so I got involved. And through that, because George W. Bush was a Republican, I, by default, became a Democrat because I had not yet heard about the Libertarian Party. We'll fast forward a little bit. Barack Obama gets elected. He doesn't end the wars. He doesn't close Gitmo. He doesn't talk to our opponents through diplomacy. And he gets a Nobel Peace Prize. And so I left the Democratic Party because I realized they weren't really an anti-war party. And lo and behold, a couple years later, I was at the Atlanta Pride Festival and ran into our candidate for governor that year. And he asked me, what is the most important political issue to you? And I bet you're pretty libertarian if you think about it. And I said, I oppose the war on terror and the war in Iraq with every fiber of my being. And the next words out of his mouth were, welcome home. It wasn't, well, what's your view on economics? How do you feel about this issue? Are you a real libertarian? No. He said, welcome home. You can come in here, sit down with us libertarians, you'll learn about stuff, you'll engage in discourse, it'll be great. And that's the kind of candidate I want to be for president. If you believe that the government is too big, broadly speaking, I want you in our tent. I want you to come to Liberty. I want you to be a libertarian, even if for one election, so you can see what we're all about. Sit down, enjoy the room, you'll make friends, trust me. And that's the kind of campaign I'm running. An outward focused campaign, an aspirational campaign that talks about the best of our political philosophy. Nationally, we have real issues going on. We have record runaway inflation right now in this country while families all over the country are trying to raise kids and the cost of living keeps going up and up and up. And so we have to have an answer to that. And what is causing inflation? Some people in the media will say, it's corporate greed. Well, let me ask you a question. Are corporations suddenly more greedy than they were 5 years ago? No, corporations have always been greedy and wanting money. So that's not the answer. The truth is because our government spends more money than it takes in. And to make up that difference, we print dollars out of thin air. And when we print money out of thin air, it devalues all of our money. Even your savings is being eaten away by the hidden tax that is inflation. And we need to stop that. And the way we stop that is by balancing our budget. It's not a difficult thing to do. We did it in the 90s, and we had the largest explosion of the middle class our country's ever seen. Those two things are not unrelated. They're not unconnected. And so we need to balance our budget. And it doesn't take a lot of work. At our current revenues, all we have to do is get our spending back to 2019 spending before the pandemic, and our budget is balanced. It only requires that we cut all the excesses that we don't really need. And when we do that, we're going to put our economy back on the track that it needs to be, paying down the debt so that young people aren't suffering the consequences of our broken economic policies in 20 or 30 years, and so that I can retire in security and comfort knowing that the economy is not going to go in the toilet right as I'm retiring, right? And so that's an issue that is important to every single American family. But there's other issues that are extremely important at the national level. I'm also an immigration rights advocate. Why? Because immigrants are human beings and all human beings deserve the same inherent human liberty and rights. All of us, I don't see any Native Americans in the room. If you are, please raise your hand. But if there's no Native Americans here in the room, we all came here from somewhere else at some point, or our ancestors did. And so we need to talk about the immigration crisis in our country. It's not caused by immigrants, it's caused by bad government. We should have an Ellis Island style immigration system. If you want to come here and work, come here and work. Just declare that you're here, And that's all we really need, that you're not sick and you're not wanted for some sort of crime that we would require you to extradite you back. But as long as you're just here to work, you should be allowed to do that. Because that's proverbially what 99.9% of immigrants want to do. Just come here and work, put down their roots, start their American dream. And when we take the focus off of them and just allow them to come here and work, we can hyper-focus our border security and our law enforcement on the real crimes that happen on our border. Namely, the crime of human trafficking for the purposes of labor or sexual exploitation. That does happen, and I would really like it if our Border Patrol could stop it from happening. But it will never happen if we're only focusing on this massive amount of people who are here to do good work. Lastly, one of the things I talk about a lot as a candidate for president is localism. Bringing our politics back to our local communities. If you are a parent in this room, please raise your hand. Keep your hand raised if you have unconditional love for your children. You would do anything for those kids. You would fight, you would die for your kids, right? All right. So shouldn't you be the advocate that has the most control over your family and over your life, as opposed to a bureaucrat who lives in Washington, D.C.? That bureaucrat, they may mean well, but they don't know you. They don't know your family. They don't know your community. You know those things. So why don't we take the power out of the hands of these faraway bureaucrats who don't have unconditional love for your children? They know your children as a number on a spreadsheet. Is that the person who should be making the decisions? Or should it be you who's the best advocate for your kid with regards to their education, their health care, or any other decision? Because you are going to be their best advocate. And that's what I want to do. At every level that we can, I want to fight to take power out of the hands of Washington, D.C. and bring it back to local communities just like this. Because you know your neighbors. You love your neighbors. And you're going to treat them with respect. And with that comes a better, more honest, more transparent government. That's why I'm here supporting Dave Crance. He is a local candidate here in Virginia. I am traveling all over the country, not just to run for president, but the other victory, right? The idea that a libertarian might get elected president is a very hard victory, right? But there are other wins we can have, namely electing local libertarians all over the country so that they can begin the process of taking that power out of the hands of Washington, D.C., or even your state house, and bringing it back to your local communities. That's why I'm here to support Dave Crance, and I want to tell you how you can both support me and him if you like what you're hearing from me. Now, my campaign manager back there is Steve Dosbach. He's real supportive of my campaign. In fact, he's so supportive of my campaign that he's already legally maximum donated all the money he can to me. He can't give me another dime, even if he wanted to. But he hasn't max donated to Dave here. So here's what we're going to do. If anybody in this room tonight gives to my campaign, 120% of your donation will go to Dave Crance out of Steve Dosbach's pocket. So let's make Steve spend some money, please. So I encourage you, if you want to give right here, right now, again, if you give me $100, Steve's giving him 120. So your money's doubling and then some. So if you want to give to this campaign right now, you can pull out your phone and text CHASE to 21,000. A link will pop up right there to donate. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way. Go to the website, votechaseoliver.com. Or you can do it the even more old-fashioned way if you got a checkbook and write us a check here now. But any money you guys give to my campaign tonight is going to get doubled and then some to Dave Crance. So if you want to support Dave, please help me tonight in my campaign for president. I would love your support, honestly, for myself, but I also love to see Steve having to write out a big check to Dave right here, because I want to make sure you have everything you need to do what you need to do as a candidate, to knock on the doors, to talk to your neighbors, to have literature to put in their hands. That's the kind of work we need from a local candidate. That's why I'm here to support Dave. And I think each and every one of you have a great opportunity, not just to support a candidate for president, which I do welcome your support, but also to turn that into even more money for Dave here. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Dave, let him tell you a little bit about his campaign, and if you have any questions for me or him, we'd be happy to answer them for you. Thank you very much. I hope you all have peace, love, and joy.
I'm going to keep mine a little shorter because there's not a face in this room that I don't recognize with it. Number one, he just said it: peace, love, and liberty. That's what my campaign has been about since the beginning. Now, unlike Chase, I was that guy downrange for 2 different wars. I've seen what is necessary, what happens to protect this country, and what we live in. And even as I'm sitting here, I'm looking at Don, who, a brother of mine who served with the Vietnamese army. I've heard his stories. There are so many stories out there of what it took us to get to the point where we can walk out in the street and not have to look over our shoulders. And he brings up a good point, because we're starting to slip back in, and I want to bring that up tonight, we're starting to slip back into some of this policing of America. That needs to stop quickly. It's not part of my campaign, but with recent events, I'm going to bring that out. Going back to my campaign, I'm honored to have Chase here. He represents our party phenomenally, I think. Can we all give him a hand? I want everybody tonight to please rob Steve. If you're not sure what he just said really fast, he's right there waiting for you. He can re-explain it, because I do appreciate that offer, which literally just came up this evening. I wasn't expecting that. That's, Steve, thank you, sir. Local liberty in action. When I first started looking at some of his material with it, and those of you who are libertarians who know my material, it almost seemed like we had the same authors, and we truly didn't. Locally, we need to take our government back. The two-party system has failed us for years now, and as he said, what are we looking at? Another Trump-Biden election? Does anybody in here believe we should really have another Trump-Biden election? I'm just curious. Does anybody in this room believe that?
No.
And if you raise your hand, I'll clap for you, because I'll respect it. I respect everybody's decisions. But there's not a hand raised in this room. My campaign is at the state level, but at some point, we've got to come to the decision that the old systems are failing us. We can choose the best of who we're allowed to choose for. And if we continue to walk to these polling places and take that Democrat list or that Republican list and vote straight down party ticket without doing research, it's going to get worse. We don't have control at the local level right now. So my campaign is about going to Richmond. Chase's campaign is about going to Washington to stop it, to bring our politics, to bring our government back in control. So I do want to say tonight, and I wish we could get the word out, and I need every one of you to tell people, we have an option come November 7th in Virginia. We have an option next year when we vote. We have an option to say, enough. And as my campaign has been, I'm not telling you to leave the Democrat Party. I'm not telling you to leave the Republican Party. I'm not telling you to leave anybody. Because you know what? They left you. They left you a long time ago. I'm asking for you to send a message that if you will not come back to us, you will not listen to us, you will not listen to us at the local level, then we'll vote for people who will. And that's why I'm asking for your vote come November 7th. And I'm asking you, as a small party candidate, get the word out. Tell your neighbor. As soon as we're done with this, I'm going to bring in a bunch of signs. If you're in my district here, put the signs out. We've all seen them. I got to thank a lot of people here. But as some of you know, I'll go on all night. I'm very passionate about this. We need people to step up. There are people in this room that joined my breakfast seeking out candidates for the Libertarian Party when I was running those breakfasts last year. The whole reason I'm running is because I wasn't unable to find candidates to step up for the Libertarian Party, to step up to take our government back. The promise I made my wife, and by the way, can I get a hand for Sue? I'm out there every single day. She is just going nonstop with it. The promise I made to her was, look, honey, it's my VA money. If we can find 5 candidates and give them each $2,000 to step up and run to take our government back, it's a worthy investment. And failing to do that, Lord knows I've tried. I'm like, honey, I got to do this myself. We got to start somewhere. Maybe if I start, maybe others will follow. But I'm going to tell you, even as I'm looking, I'm not going to point people out. I know people in this room, which I almost did. I apologize. I'm going to look the other way. I know much better people in this room right now who could stand up and run 2 years from now. At some point, we have all got to stand up. I know people in this room who have stood up for us and ran previously with us, and we need to stand up again. Because if we give up, we got nothing. If we don't try, we got nothing. We have to step up and take our government back. That said, I've also really learned a lot campaigning. I'm going to tell everybody something. Your neighbors aren't different. I see different leanings within my own party. I see people I know personally from different parties in this room, which really amazes me. Knocking on these doors, we're not different. Tomorrow when you get up, when you walk out in the morning, when you see your neighbor, wave, walk over, introduce yourself. I can tell you, they're going to talk to you. We are letting politics divide us as a community. Talk to your neighbors. When you go to the Exxon, the 7-Eleven, the Dunkin' Donuts, the Starbucks, talk to the person in line. We got to get back to talking to each other instead of watching the media and watching the government. Lastly, one of the things I've learned is I can be so impressed by people. And I'm only going to throw one story out here because I don't want to look like a politician. Kedar, may I? Can I speak about our meeting? I met Kedar over here because I got a text. I really like your campaign. I want to support you. And I sent back, sure. And he's like, can you come meet me? And I'm like, sure, I'll be out Saturday. I'll be door knocking. I thought he was going to be in my Annandale district. And he was just outside of the district. So that day when I looked up the address, I'm like, I text him back. I'm like, you're just outside my district. Do you want me to still come by? And he was like, sure. And I had an impression that I was going to meet, and I had an impression I was going to meet an elderly gentleman. So I went over to meet him. He came down to meet me in front of his apartment building and took me up to his apartment, showed me his place, and told me the most incredible story. He's allowed me to tell the story this evening. He has faced some severe challenges. He has gotten himself to a place where he is taking care of himself. He is standing alone. We were sitting in his apartment, and I asked, if I were to win, and I told him, chances are unlikely, I'm a Libertarian. If I were to win, though, what would you need from me? And his answer was, I want to work. I want to work. Because our system's set up to give people help to get them to a certain level, and then it keeps them there. We don't have the means to bridge the gap to help people step up. I mean, he donates his time in his mosque. We spent a long time talking. And I am honored to have met this gentleman. And it was it's one of those moments where you walk away and all the hair is standing up on your arms and you're like, you know what? My whole focus might be off. I realize now how important this campaign and how important these positions are to everybody out there. And I'd like to give him a hand because, I mean, what he's accomplished. In general, I'm going to wrap it up because I will talk all night. Everybody's like, Dave, shut up. But we need to tell people we need to get involved locally, whether it be through donations, time. I don't care what. It doesn't have to be politics, people. Get involved with your local schools. Get involved with scouting, get involved with sports, get involved with something, but find a way to put the time aside to get involved with our community. I grew up on a tobacco farm. I grew up before we had the words environment, protect the environment, and green this and that. And these are all great terms and great things that have come up. I was told, my sister's sitting back there, you know what I'm saying? We're stewards of the land. All I heard growing up farming. We are stewards of the land. This is the 70s and 80s, and I'm not giving up her age. That's my age. I'm much, much older than her. We're stewards of the land, and this is our responsibility. And this comes down to if you take, you replace. And I don't want to go into how replacing tobacco with soybean and replacing with corn, retreats. I could go into a farmer's story forever, but whatever you take out, you have to give back. And that stuck with me, this whole stewards of land concept, because really everybody in this room, we may not be running farms, we have a community. We need to be stewards of our community. We take something out, we give something back. And when you get up tomorrow, think about how we can give something back to that community for what we've taken from it. Chase, I'm sorry, I talked a lot. I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, you're all good. Thank you for speaking about of your campaign a little bit.
Yes,
Again,
sir.
it's why I'm here today, not just a candidate for president, but I'm here to support local candidates in Virginia. You got an election November the 7th. Imagine early voting might be...
It's already going on. It's
Early voting's
day.
already started. So you have no excuse to go out tomorrow. Well, I don't know if the polls are open on
1
Sundays.
o'clock, 1 o'clock on Sunday.
There you go. So after you get out of church or mosque or wherever you might be on a Sunday, head on down and go vote for Dave Crance. Now that being said, if you have any questions about a candidate for president, national politics, really any question you want to ask me, it doesn't have to be politics related. I've taken weird questions from all kinds of people. Libertarians were a fun bunch. So feel free to ask me any questions, or if you have any questions about Dave's campaign, though he said he knows every single person in this room. So I imagine he has already talked your head off about his campaign and told you all about it. But if you need any clarification, please ask him too. But I will take any questions you folks have.
Before we start this, will say I'm going to turn the questions over to him because I've never met a libertarian presidential hopeful in person. My libertarian people, how many of you met? That came out to your town to talk to us. So, about our party, about his campaign, this is your chance. And we have different views in this room. I know that for a fact. If you want to learn a little bit about where our party stands, here's the man that's hoping to be our leader at some point shortly. So I'll turn it over to you, sir.
And I think you had your hand raised right there, sir. So we'll start it off.
Okay. Economics, inflation, things like that. What no one has said, and no one seems to recognize, and I'm talking about the current parties, the current Congress and all that, is the role that automation, robotics, and artificial intelligence is going to play. That is coming here, whether we like it or not, more quickly than we prefer, and most of the people in this room will not have jobs because they will replace us. When you get a machine to replace us with faster, better, cheaper, how do you tell them what to do to better their life to respond to their new reality?
Well, thank you for the question. And AI is a major issue to worry about, particularly in the heartland, particularly with a lot of people who work with their hands. As you said, their jobs might be replaced in a few years. First thing I can tell you this is government is not going to be able to bail you out. It's not the way, government, they mean well, but a lot of times you give them $1 and you get 50 cents worth of service out of it, right? And AI is a serious thing that, it is something that is going to affect each and every one of us. It's going to change the way the world works. And this is why a couple weeks ago I was asked by somebody, what are you going to do to bring the manufacturing jobs back to the United States? And I said, well, as president, I can't create jobs out of thin air. The economy creates jobs. But I'll be frank with you, with the way AI and automation is coming, there's a good chance a lot of these manufacturing jobs will not be coming back to the United States. And in fact, these manufacturing jobs that are now overseas, that we lost to other nations, there's a good chance those factories might be automated too one day. I'm also an idealist for the future. If I wasn't wearing this lapel pin, I'd be having my Spock lapel pin on. I'm a huge Trekkie. And I do believe in the possibility of a future where technology allows us to live and have a standard of living for a much lower cost. And so while automation will cost jobs, it will also make the standard of living less expensive when we're able to make things at an automated level. Now the question is how do we transition ourselves into this AI economy? Well, I can tell you what we can't do is rely on Washington, D.C. to centrally plan the method to which we are going to move ourselves. The best indicator is not a central planned bureaucrat in D.C. It is going to come from the trillions of individual decisions that happen at the marketplace and consumer level. And I understand that that's not like the easiest answer to give. But one of the things that we can do is we can have a more educated workforce going forward. And that is about choice in education. I believe that the public school system is a one-size-fits-all kind of model, and it creates the cracks that students like even myself fell through. I was dyslexic and dysgraphic growing up. I still have trouble reading sometimes. And so I'm a believer in choice in education because the way we're going to educate the workforce of the future, the way we're going to create jobs of the future that involve technology, innovation, and moving ourselves oftentimes away from some of the blue-collar jobs that exist today, is to provide that choice in education. And for that, I believe in funding the students and not the systems. And so I think parents should be able to decide for a school, like if your kid's really good at engineering, find an engineering school for them to go to, find a fine arts school for them to go to, but tailor-make education for people. But there is no one-size-fits-all solution that a candidate for president is going to be able to give you on AI, because it happens in the marketplace. And if a president tries to say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, what they're going to do is stifle the innovation in that marketplace that will create more innovation in the future. So I know it's not a great answer that you might want to hear, but it is the answer that I believe is true. I can't bring jobs back. I can't make jobs appear. What we can do is transition ourselves in an orderly way towards this AI future. And I think we are working our way through that process. I'm the grandson of truckers on both sides of my family. So I know the value of that work, and I know that trucking jobs probably won't be around in 25 years. I won't get to be a trucker like my grandfather was. And that's just the sad reality of some things, but there's also limitless potential that AI can bring to our economy that can make our daily lives a lot less expensive.
I recognize the next question. Mr. Reed, can you stand up?
Sure.
Seems like you have a question for us.
Hey, Mr.
Before
Reed.
your question, as many of you know, I have only one opponent on the ballot. We're in Northern Virginia, and Northern Virginia is moving towards a one-party system. And I'm not saying that's right. Southern Virginia is moving towards a one-party system. We're seeing red in the south, blue in the north. We're seeing unchallenged districts where the voters have nobody to vote for. There's no choice. The reason I'm bringing that up is Ken Reed has stepped up to be the Republican candidate for state senate for our district, and to my pleasure has taken the time to show up this evening with us. So I do want to give my hand for stepping up and putting the choice on the ballot. So at least we have options. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that's a huge, huge deal, and I thank you for that, sir.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn it back over to y'all.
Is the choice between you and him? Is that what you're saying?
No, he is
we're
running
not
for
running
the House of Delegates.
Okay.
But, and I'll say, in Georgia, we have a similar problem. 60% of state house and senate races in Georgia run unopposed,
Unchallenged.
and that represents 80% of our state's population. And so at least you have more than one choice in the ballot. That's a good thing. I've hung out with Republicans before. I went to the Log Cabin Republican Mixer last year when I was running for Senate. So thank you for coming into a den full of libertarians. And what's your question, sir?
Well, first, my name is Ken Reed, and I'm running in the 37th district. Anybody here live in Falls Church or Fairfax City, Vienna, Hopeton, Merrifield, Dunlorne, Grapeville? My card is on the table there, and if you want to hold your nose and vote for a Republican. I have to tell that to all the Democratic voters that come to the polls with blood in their mouths. They don't want to vote for a Republican, and they don't realize that I actually have a track record. I was in elected office in Loudon for 10 years. That's where I got to know Bill Redpath. Anybody here know Bill Redpath? He was the Libertarian candidate, lived in my neighborhood. And so he would vote for me when I ran for town council and board of supervisors. But because of this party discipline that we have, I signed a pledge that I have to support all Republican candidates. But I did vote for Bill once or twice. I did for the Libertarian, or either I forget whether it was for Congress or for Senate.
We won't tell anybody.
Okay, we won't tell you. Thank you. Well, that's years ago. So.
Why'd you sign?
Of course, we got a few cameras here, but don't.
I just can't publicly support a candidate of the other parties.
That doesn't answer the question. You don't have to sign the pledge, and you still
Well,
have
when you, to be the
support
nominee,
that person.
to be the nominee of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, you have to sign.
I'll
They do require
I'll tell you a
pledge.
great story.
But anyway, let me just ask my question, okay? One of the things that we have a problem with in the Northern Virginia area, and a lot of Virginia, it's not so much a problem, but we've used the public-private partnership approach to build a lot of toll roads. And it's worked fairly well, except in the last year or two, because VDOT made a decision that you have to have 3 people in a car as opposed to 2 to use the HOT lanes for free. And going inside the Beltway, as you know, it's been highway robbery for 5 years. It goes to $27 if you're going into the district in the morning, or if you're in the evening going out to Tyson's Corner. And that's a government enterprise. That's all government dictated. There was no private money that went into that. So that's your money that's going into bike trails and other projects that are not going back into the road. But outside the Beltway is pretty expensive too. And with gas prices, a lot of people are not using those express toll lanes. So this is one of the things that probably distinguishes, that might be a division between Republicans and Libertarians, that we support government expenditures on infrastructure, but what is your stance on that in terms of the national picture, you know, in terms of where money should be spent on infrastructure, should be, what's your give on that? My website is kenreed.org.
Thank you for plugging your website. You're a good candidate
Sure
for doing so. But I want to say two things. First and foremost, you were the first candidate in a question and answer for my campaign for president to ask this libertarian about the roads. Thank you so much for that, sir, because I was waiting for somebody to ask me about roads.
You were?
Yes, sir. They love to ask us about roads.
Transportation has been my major failing.
Secondly, I do want to say this. You know, you mentioned that you can't endorse candidates outside your party. I had a similar experience when I did want to get the endorsement of the Log Cabin Republicans in Georgia. If you're not familiar, I'm LGBT. They are the LGBT Republican group. And so I was like, hey guys, endorse me. And they said, we can't, but you can come to our Pride Mixer. And so that's what I did. And I show up and they show a video of all the candidates they're supporting and endorsing. They start with dog catcher all the way on up to governor. And then they stop the video and they're like, that's all the candidates we have endorsed in this race. They did not endorse my Republican opponent in the Senate race. And then they said, and Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate for Senate, just happens to be here if you want to talk to him for a little while. So I get not being able to formally endorse, but there's workarounds. Just letting you know, there's workarounds. But you asked me about transportation, what we're going to do about toll roads.
Well, any infrastructure.
Yeah, well, and when you mentioned the toll roads and you said, well, the government said that you got to go from 2 to 3 drivers. Well, I'm glad that the government is deciding how that private-public partnership should work, right? And they're the ones who are determining what should be going on with these lanes. That seems to be government intrusion into the private marketplace, and I would oppose that. I think the people who own the toll roads, who are handling the infrastructure of toll roads, they should be deciding how many people get in their HOT lane, right? And that is ridiculous that you would take money from those tolls and then use them for other services. The whole purpose of using the toll road method is that you're going to maintain those roads with the money you collect from those tolls. Also, by the way, if we are going to switch, and it's something I support. I have a colleague of mine in New York named Larry Sharp. He came up with the idea, well, why don't we make, and he had a great idea when he ran for governor in New York. Why don't we sell off the ad rights to the Brooklyn Bridge? The Brooklyn Bridge brought to you by Coca-Cola. Well, you know why? Because you can advertise Coca-Cola up and down that bridge. If the bridge starts to fail, we know exactly who to blame. It's the people at Coca-Cola who aren't maintaining the road. And oh, by the way, we're going to get a different sponsor next year. How about when you're driving through the Lincoln Tunnel, it's sponsored by Lincoln, right? You get a car commercial as you're driving. I don't oppose that. In fact, I think that is a great way to take stress off of local communities to fund their infrastructure and work with the private marketplace to actually facilitate good, strong infrastructure for their communities. One of the things that one of my distinguished Republican opponents, Governor Ron DeSantis, decided he wanted to go to war with Walt Disney last year and sued them because he didn't like the fact that they were maintaining their own infrastructure in the area. I say we don't need less of those special districts. We actually need more of those, to where companies that want to invest in the infrastructure around their area should be able to do that because they have customers that need to get to their business. They have a vested interest in making sure they have good, responsible infrastructure in their area. And so you're right, it might be a division from some two-party folks, but I am absolutely in support of things like toll roads and sponsoring infrastructure. I don't think it's a terrible idea. And also, it's something that you can try at the more local level and create a proof of concept and expand nationwide. And so that's what I would like to see with our infrastructure, is less putting stress on the individual localized, local communities and allowing the private marketplace, the people who are providing the jobs already in the area in these industries, particularly in towns that are industry towns, we'll let those industries handle that infrastructure. And by the way, if you don't like what they're doing, you can buy a share and have a vote each and every day in those companies. And so I absolutely support that kind of privatization of infrastructure and hope we could expand it. It works really good in Georgia with our express lanes. I can tell you it works really good. I was just driving through Florida, man, and it's nice to be able to hop on those express lanes if you want to pay a little bit of money to do that. And I like the fact that that convenience exists.
Well, Chase, I got elected 4 times to local office on the transportation issue, so you keep hammering away. And if Trump and Biden are facing each other, you might be the next president, so you all better get selfies with this.
I'm just going to say this, man.
Hold on, there you go. That was not an endorsement.
I'm telling you, keep hammering away on that transportation stuff, my friend. Everybody has to get caught in traffic. Everybody has to deal with it. The government's putting money into Amtrak and nonsensical stuff that's not working.
No, less Amtrak, more Brightline. That's what I like to see. Brightline, if you're not familiar, is the first privately owned rail network. It's now connecting Orlando to Miami. You get there in under 3 hours for less cost than a plane ticket. Full Wi-Fi in the train, comfortable seats, beautiful. It's certainly not Amtrak. And they're already looking to expand into Fort Lauderdale and other places in Florida. And the CEO of Brightline is already saying he's looking to invest in other areas of the country, particularly the Northeast. So in the next decade or two, there could be a Brightline train that goes from DC to New York. And it will go right through Virginia. So, you know, it might start in Virginia actually and rather go all the way through up to New York. So there's a potential to have something better than Amtrak. Because Lord knows I'm not like Joe Biden. I'm not the Amtrak president for sure.
Infrastructure. The Congress over the last 40 years has passed the infrastructure bill that has been presented by different presidential administrations to what they asked for. Now, what Congress has done later, which is what you're indirectly addressing, is they've taken that money and used it for something else.
They do that for a lot of things.
Well, of course, but to say that the infrastructure is a privatized thing, infrastructure cannot be totally privatized.
That's why
Because it's a national problem. You talk about Amtrak. I ride Amtrak all the time, all over this country. Now, it's not like Canadian Rail, because I ride Canadian Rail too. But, you know, without the fact that infrastructure existed to put rails there, to improve rails, most people would not have, most poor people would not have an alternative to get to where they're going. And Amtrak, by the way, is expanding. They're doing similar things that they do from Lorton to on the auto train out in Utah and Nevada.
But I think if you look at Amtrak as compared to some other train lines, particularly in Europe, which is like, you know, Western Europe.
We're not in Europe.
But they're the closest neighbor. They're the closest like relatable economy. And if you see that most of the train lines in Europe are privately owned, they're not publicly owned. And if you look at the quality of the train that you're getting on, it is much better, and it's not that much more expensive than Amtrak, or in many cases it's not more expensive at all. You can get on a train to travel from Spain to Germany for a lower cost than you can to travel the same track on Amtrak.
True.
And I'm not opposed to trains, and I'm not opposed to infrastructure. In fact, I love trains, I love planes, I love kind of all those kind of things. I'm actually kind of an aviation enthusiast, but you know, I think that if you look at the money that we've put into Amtrak, taxpayer money over the decades, and you look at the service that you get from Amtrak,
Right.
there is no question that if we had put that money into a private market and allowed private money to create the transportation infrastructure, it would look better. And why? Because there's a profit motive. Amtrak knows they'll always be bailed out by the government because they're government funded. They have no incentive to increase their services and to make their things and make their trains better. But private companies do. They have an incentive. I mean, and that's nothing against public transportation. It exists, trust me. And I know the libertarian ideal does not happen overnight. This is something that has to transition. One of the things I focus on in my campaign is that while I can put the libertarian ideal out there, I also recognize that I live here on planet Earth, not fantasy land. And that I have to and there's a transition period from that. But I take public transportation all the time. I take MARTA in Atlanta. Every time I get from the airport, I take MARTA back home to my local station because it's cheaper than paying $60 for an Uber.
You've actually not answered the question per se. I've lived in Europe, okay? I'm stationed in Europe, okay? I've traveled all over Europe by train, okay? I'm familiar with their train system, and they have a much better train system in a lot of ways than what we have here. But it's unfair to compare us to them. They're a different environment, a different country. I mean, if you look at British Columbia is larger than all of Europe, okay? So, you know, you have 11 or 12 or 13 different systems, governmental systems, that you're advocating, saying, let's compare that to Amtrak. Unfair. They're different. And we don't live in Europe.
You're right. And if you want to give it a more comparable thing, just compare European trains to the Northeast corridor of Amtrak. Just how the Northeast works. New England is size-wise roughly there. And you can make comparisons. And you're right, nothing is going to be a direct comparison. They don't, you know, there's different culture in Europe. They speak a lot of different languages. They have a lot of different culture, a lot of different way of life. And you're right, transportation there, they are less car cities. They are more biking and training cities. That's kind of the way their cities have been built up throughout history. So you're right. It's not a direct comparison. But what I'm trying to say is if we had the same principles, the free market principles, when it came to developing our rail infrastructure, we would have something better than Amtrak. It's nothing against Amtrak workers. It's nothing against people who ride the train, take the train. I've taken Amtrak. I've taken the train, because it's a reliable transportation system that I don't have to drive. So, I'm not opposed to infrastructure. I just think it's better handled private. And we've seen this. There's numerous examples of where private infrastructure is shown to be very effective. Will it be 100% of the time? Probably not, but we're going to transition our way towards more private-public partnerships, I think, is the way to go. Oh, well, that is without saying. In every area, there's too many regulations. Yes, ma'am, I see your hands up right there.
If this question makes you uncomfortable, I'll give you another option. You managed Joe Jorgensen's campaign. So what do you feel were the weaknesses of Joe Jorgensen's campaign, or what would you do differently?
Oh, that's an easy
That's a
question
great
to answer. There's always something to improve on. First off, when I started this thing, I started out with an exploratory committee. So I actually just explored whether there was viability in running, and one of the first things I did was I asked Joe Jorgensen out to dinner, because I wanted to know, kind of, is she running again? Because that would affect my choice of viability there. But I asked her a lot. I picked her brain, actually, about what she thought was great, what she thought she could have done better. And I can tell you one of the things. You all got my rack card right here. There's already a professional logo and branding on here. One of the things that stalled the Jorgensen campaign was that it took 3 months to get that logo out and to start getting literature and signs and things out with the official logo. We will not have that problem with my campaign. It was one of the first things I wanted to make sure we did was get properly branded. Another area where I think I am actually better than Dr. Jorgensen, and nothing against her, I think I'm a more emphatic and energetic speaker. I think I am better at being able to talk our principles in a way that sounds more attractive. Nothing against her, she's a college professor. She talks like a college professor. Sometimes that's not the most exciting thing. Another thing that we need to focus on is really targeting what states we hit and why we're hitting them and what the objective is there. I know there are some states in 2020 who felt like we weren't visited enough, or when she came, she didn't talk about what we needed her to talk about. I know that that happened in the past. I observed that feedback. And with that, in Virginia, you all now have my email address that's on that business card. If there's something going on in Virginia that you think I need to talk about, please let me know. Or feel free to give me that constructive criticism. If you see something I do on the campaign trail and you're like, oh my God, that was boneheaded, I need to tell Chase how dumb that was. Please don't do that again. I can take it. I can take constructive criticism. I'm a big enough person to realize I am not a perfect human being, and I will screw up from time to time, right? And another thing that I feel like with Joe, and this is nothing against her and Spike, I just feel like they were a little oil and water in terms of styling. I'm hoping to get a running mate that is going to really complement me, pick out the best of my positives, and accentuate things that I might not be as strong on. And so one of the things Joe did not do is ask for her vice presidential running mate. She did not outright say, this is the person I want, and she got Spike. And I love Spike, don't get me wrong. But their styles are a little different. So if I'm the nominee, I'm going to feel very comfortable going, this is the vice presidential candidate I think I want. And I would hope that you would give me them. Because I think if you just leave it ambiguous, it's up to the delegates. And without any guidance from you as the nominee. I hope that if they make me the nominee, they trust in my pick for VP. But then again, it comes from the floor, so they could just say, hey, Dave's a delegate from Virginia. We'll just make him the VP. So it's up to them. But there's definitely lessons I wouldn't do that and Spike. But you also have to remember that campaign was also very unique. It was happening during the height of the initial COVID pandemic outbreak. Everything was locked down. She had to do all her events outside. I think they did a very good job of adapting the best they could to those conditions. But I have no such constraints. So I don't have to worry about if the police are going to show up and tell me there's too many people in a room to do an event. So I wish she had gotten to run a more normal campaign, because I think she would have actually grown our vote totals from where we were in 2016, actually. Yes, ma'am?
Good evening. My question for you is, you talk a lot about balancing budgets, on also about getting out of wars that we could not be in. So my question to you is, if you were to become president of the United States and you would be sponsoring the presidential budget, in order to balance budgets, I don't see how you can do that without tackling defense budget portion, right, of the president's budget. So how would you tackle the defense industrial complex?
Oh, yeah.
To try to get after balancing budgets?
Yeah, that is a tough lobbying group to fight, the military-industrial complex. All the way back to when Eisenhower warned us about it in his farewell speech. That will probably be the toughest lobby that I do fight if I become president. But it's a fight I'm willing to take because that's what I got started in politics to do, is to oppose the military-industrial complex, the increased militarization of our foreign policy. And so, you know, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sit my potential, I'm hoping he'll be Senate confirmed, Secretary of Defense and the Chiefs of Staff, and I'm going to say, you need to come up with a way you're going to cut the budget down by X number of dollars, so that way we can, and we're going to have, and that's going to require closing bases. That's going to require us canceling some weapon systems that we don't need. And it's going to require us to have the bravery to stand up to the military-industrial complex and those who they fund in Congress. Because what's going to happen is when you say, no, we need to cancel that weapon systems, they're going to say, you hate America. You want us to not be safe. You want the terrorists to win. But that's not true. We already have a massively powerful military. Our military is so strong that nobody even thinks twice about going to war with us directly. And we can still do that even if we reduced our military budget by half. We would still be far more funded, far more militarily capable, and far more ready to take on any opponent that comes to us. Never mind the fact that we're also a heavily well-armed population. And I would just laugh if anybody tried. I say this all the time. If some country parked a carrier off of Savannah, Georgia, and they emptied it out and they tried to invade this country, they wouldn't get halfway to Atlanta before the banjo started playing and the rednecks started popping them and taking them. And so I have no fear of invasion in this country. And so the question is what is the purpose of our military? Is it to fight wars all over the world that we're not being directly threatened by our national security? No, I don't believe that's the purpose of our military. Our purpose of our military is plain and simple, to protect us from invasion, to protect us and our country from being attacked from another nation. So why is our foreign policy so based in militarism? Why? Because since 9/11, that's what we've been doing. And when people say we need to do a military solution here, there, or anywhere else, I remind them that we've been doing 22 years of military adventurism through the Middle East. And has that gotten more stable and more peaceful? I don't think so. And so we have to have a different kind of foreign policy. And that's one of the things that requires this. When we cut down our military budget, we have to replace that military footprint with another footprint, a market footprint, a diplomatic footprint around the world. And so we have to be willing to talk to our enemies. We have to be willing to say to people, you know, we can create more peace in the world by trading with one another instead of trading bombs with one another. This is also why I don't fear war with China, you guys. And though you're hearing all the time, oh, tensions are rising over Taiwan, I don't fear that. Why? Because I worked in logistics. I know exactly how much China trades with us and we trade with China. If we went to a direct war with China, it would be mutually assured economic destruction for both of our nations. And so the truth is we don't really have an interest in going to war with China. But why are we hearing the sabers being rattled? Well, China wants to appear large on the world stage and like they're challenging the United States and that they're ascending. And on our side, it's because there are people who work for Boeing and Raytheon and all these other groups, and they're like, we need to get that next weapon system because China's coming. But that's not going to happen. I hate to tell you. And so, if I'm president, we're going to take our viewpoint off of being a militarized foreign policy and being a diplomatic, market-based foreign policy. Because that is how you export democracy, ladies and gentlemen. You don't do it with war. You do not export democracy with bombs. You do it with markets. You do it with capital. You do it with McDonald's. And it's true. That's what's going to bring more peace in the world, is not the United States deciding to be the world's policeman, but being the world's trading partner. I think that's a better foreign policy. It's more in line with our national values and the values that founded this nation. And I think it's going to be ultimately leading to a safer nation overall, because we won't have the residual blowback that war creates. And so,
Follow on.
yes.
How will you negotiate that with the House and the Senate, particularly the House consensus?
Yeah. How am I going to negotiate that with the House and the Senate? Well, first and foremost, if I'm elected president, I'm the commander-in-chief. I can pull troops out of wherever I want to. In fact, there hasn't been a declared war since World War II, so Congress long ago gave up that responsibility. And so here's the truth. If Congress wants to stop me, they need to give me a formal declaration of war and tell me why. And I will either sign it if it's needed, or I will veto if it's not. But until Congress actually does their job and declare wars, I don't care about what they have to say about it. I'm going to close the bases. I'm going to send the troops home. I will redeploy them back home. And if those buildings just stay dormant and uninhabited because they didn't want to close it, well, I'm sorry, there will just be a base that's uninhabited. We'll take everything out when we come out. But I will move troops out because you're the commander-in-chief. I will challenge Congress to act, either declare war, or shut up about it, essentially. Because they gave up their responsibility a long time ago to the executive branch. And I will do what I got to do and challenge them to do it. Yes, sir.
I like your question, okay? I find your answer to be interesting, but unrealistic. I worked for 7 presidents, Nixon through Bush 43. I'm a national security guy, okay? The presidents can't do what you say you would do. They would like to, but they can't. Constitutionally, they can't. The focus for any candidate of any party should also be on international big business corporations. That's where everything is. That's where the money is. If you can't control them, you can't do all the things that you would like to do. They had a study a number of years ago where they took the top 25 U.S. international companies, corporations, who made at a minimum in profit $1 billion, minimum. And they made a lot more than that, a minimum. They paid no tax whatsoever. We pay taxes. Every one of us pays taxes. Why do we, and it's us allow them to do this? The reality is that individuals have to recognize they do have the power, but they have to get out here and get involved in their country. And if they don't care what happens across the street, how does any government that is formed think they're going to care what happens across the water or across, until we realize the power we have. And that means you have to get involved. It means you have to become educated. You have to know what people, candidates running for office, who they are, what they say, what they've said, what they said they're going to do, what they have done. And examine that to decide whether you support them. And then, if they don't do that, then you have to be willing to, in the next cycle, kick them out of office.
Well,
or one last thing. Or better yet, and this is my last thing on this. If I'm running for dog catcher, and I'm the worst possible person to beat dog catcher because I hate dogs, and you can't find anyone to run against me, that means every one of you in here, you stand up and say, I'm going to run against you. People, where are they? I mean, we hear all this talk, and I like what you're saying, and I'm more independent. But I've had a lot of experience in government at the national and international level, and I don't see the path that you're advocating.
So, 2 things that you mentioned there, and I'll talk about both. First, you mentioned about corporates and corporate control, the fact these multinationals control everything, they don't pay anything, we end up paying for that. I agree with you. I do agree with you. This is also why I want to take power in the hands of government, because our government's bought and paid for by these multinationals. They are allowed to basically lobby Congress, they pay a lot of money to do so, and they write the tax code. They have all these nooks and crannies written in the tax code that gives them the giveaways. And it allows big business to have a major advantage over the mom and pops or the small businesses. So my answer to that is remove the subsidies altogether. Just remove the subsidies and lower the overall tax code. As you remove subsidies, you just lower the code across the board. Because that way that small business gets started, it can work in the marketplace, it can compete, it can grow, become a medium-sized business, it can then compete with the larger businesses and compete with them, and they can become the large business. And if you're a giant business and you do too bad and you fail, we don't bail you out either. You fall by the wayside, your inventory is liquidated, other entrepreneurs buy your inventory, and they start anew. This is how the market is supposed to work. But the market has not been working that way because they've been controlled by these giant corporate interests. So in 2008, when the banks, oh, they're too big to fail. No, they're not. They should have failed, been broken into smaller pieces, and we would have a lot more banks in this country. That's the way it's supposed to work. And so if I'm a candidate, I want to remove their advantage at the level of subsidy and to make it where the marketplace actually competes. And I also want to remove this notion that big companies think that if I just fail, the government's going to be here to bail me out. No, we won't. You're on your own. And that's the way we should be treating business. It's a market. Corporations are not people. They are a business. They are allowed to fail. They are allowed to fall. They are allowed to break. Because when they do, someone else will take those pieces and put it together in a way that's better. And so, you're right. I am against the corporate control of government. But I think the best way to do that is to take all corporate control out of the hands of government and reduce the cost of doing business overall for everyone. That is the way to get corporate control out of our government. And then you mentioned the realistic path. And why don't we have more people standing up? The truth is that the two-party system has given us ballot access hurdles in states all over the country. In my home state of Georgia, if you want to run for Congress, you have to get 5% of the registered voters in your district to sign a petition. 1 in 20 registered voters. It's about 35,000 signatures you would need to gather. And of course, you probably need more like 45,000 because they'll throw a bunch of them out when you submit them. Because of this, we have not had a candidate run for Congress in a general election in Georgia since the 1940s. Even though there are good people who want to stand up. In fact, we sued the state. We've got that number from 5% down to 1%. And when that happened, we had candidates in every congressional district being like, I want to run now. I can do this. I can get it done. I can do it with 1%. And we were ready to run a whole field until the appeals court flipped it back to 5%. And all but one of our candidates dropped out. We had one candidate. She really wanted to run against Marjorie Taylor Greene. And she would have done awesome against her. She would have killed her in the election.
Please.
Yes, right? But she couldn't do that because of the ballot access hurdle. She walked 8 months pregnant door to door and got 4,000 signatures. That's not good enough for the state of Georgia. She needed 35,000. And so those are the kind of hurdles that make it hard for us to run independent or third-party candidates. There's also the way we vote. We have plurality voting in most of this country. It's not whoever gets over 50%, it's whoever gets the most votes. And because of this, in many, many instances, your Congress, your state houses are made up of people who have under 50% of the vote, making decisions for 100% of their community. That's wrong. It's why I'm an advocate for ranked choice voting. You should be able to go into a booth and select your first choice first, your second choice, and on down, so that you're not just voting for the lesser of two evils. Because that's the so-called spoiler effect, right? They call us spoilers in the Libertarian Party. Well, you know what? Here's two things I'll tell you. First and foremost, you can't spoil something that's already rotten, and that is the two-party system in this country. It is rotten to the core. Secondly, I'm not a spoiler. I'm a participant. I'm participating in the system that was given to me. And if I want ranked choice voting, who do I have to get that from? The Republicans and Democrats in power. I, as a Libertarian, cannot give you ranked choice voting. So here's my promise to them. We'll keep running candidates anywhere we can, and we're going to make it hurt. We're going to make it hurt for you until you give us a system that allows us to be more represented. The runoffs and the spoilage will continue until our way to vote improves. And the only people who can give that to us are the Republicans and Democrats in power. So we got to make it hurt for them until they give it to us. And that's how we're going to have more people be able to run. That's how we'll have a more representative democracy. And 2 states have already passed ranked choice voting, Maine and Alaska. And in their presidential race, I'm going to get to go there as the candidate and say, make me first on your choice. Put your lesser of two evils second. And let's see if we can make a difference in this country. And we have that in cities all over the country too. New York City elects their city council and their mayor using ranked choice voting, the largest city in the country. You're telling me we can't have that here to select our city council or our mayor so that we have more choices, more voices in the discussion, and a more overall representative democracy? I think that's a win for every single person in this room, regardless of your political party, even the Republican deck. You know what I'm saying? It's a win. Yes, sir.
Since we've gotten into the technical needs, first a simple one. Why no QR codes on any of this?
Okay, the QR code is a mistake in the graphic building. My last rack card had a QR code on it. I thought it was going to have it on there. It did not. We do have a QR code. It will be on the next print. There's also a typo on all of your rack cards. I apologize. I am not the most influential libertarian in American. I'm the most influential libertarian in America, according to Rolling Stone. So,
And this is the point where we all turn and look towards Steve.
yeah. But But no, there was a QR code, and there is, anytime I have a banner, which I did not bring with me because I didn't want to have to fight to get that on the plane, there's usually a banner behind it that has a big QR code. And that will continue into the next program run. It is something that as soon as this batch came out, I was like, I even told Steve, where's the QR code? I thought there was a QR code.
I asked Kelsey, where's the QR code?
And that's what we did. We went to our graphics and said, next time, can we please get the QR code on there? So that will happen next time.
Perfectly answered. The second one is a little more technical. What do you think of fair tax?
So the fair tax. Let me tell you. So when I said I was a Democrat before I switched to Libertarians, I was weird. I was a gun-loving Democrat. I was a fair tax Democrat. That got me lots of weird looks because John Linder, the Republican congressman in my district growing up, was the guy who actually wrote the fair tax bill. If I could replace the income tax today, replace all of it with the fair tax, consumption tax that has built-in rebate to make it more progressive, I would do that. I would do that if it came to my desk. Now, the libertarian ideal for me is to get the government so small that we only need voluntary contributions to run our government. But again, I don't live in fantasy land. I live here in the real world. And so if I have a position to take away from you being taxed from your earnings and let you tax on your consumption, that's better and a more moral system to me, especially considering the built-in rebate that allows you to have tax-free, for the essentials in your life. It basically covers all the taxes for the most essential items you would need in your life. So yeah, if I could get that in front of me, absolutely I would support it. Is it the libertarian ideal? No, but it's certainly a heck of a lot closer than the income tax code. And here's another great thing about the fair tax. If you're not familiar with the fair tax, it would replace the income tax and all other taxes with a national sales tax and consumption tax. Here's why that's even better. Because if the number is, say, 26%, you can run on, I'm going to cut government to where we only need 24% of your money when you go buy something. Or 22%. Let's get it down to 20% and 15%. And you can fight to get it down. But right now, the income tax, well, it depends on your income, it depends on where you're at, it depends on your deductions, you don't know how much you're really paying. It's very ambiguous to see how much you're paying. When you get the fair tax, you know exactly how much the government's taking out of your pocket every day, and you can demand that they do less of that. And it's very easy to tell a politician, get me 3% points lower. That's what I want. If you want my vote, you tell me how you're going to get the government to take 3% less of my money away every time I buy something. And that is how the fair tax keeps people more honest and transparent. And so absolutely, if the fair tax got in front of my desk as president, I would sign it. And I'm happy to say I shook the hands with the guy who wrote that bill, John Linder. He was my congressman when I was a kid. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question in the back. Yes, ma'am. A much younger sister.
I'm genuinely interested. I'm curious. Hopefully this doesn't result in my brother saying we should have had this conversation privately. What are your thoughts with the candidate, your party, who says we need to close bases? When we are children, our grandfather was in World War II, survived D-Day, lost his leg, lost his eyes. Unfortunately for us, we met our grandmother who volunteered at Walter Reed during World War II. Followed by youth in multiple combats, lost many friends and colleagues, and continue to try and help our veterans who are suffering and not being treated with respect. What are your thoughts about that with someone who might be a little attention deficit and only hear
Closing bases, right?
closing bases?
Well, first, I mean, if you want to answer that first, or
I'm trying to decide who that was to, right? I mean, I'll start off. At the end, the question was to me, what I heard is we need to close bases overseas. We need to remove our footprint overseas to the extent, and correct me when you speak, I believe we need to remove our footprint to the extent that we're safe. Do I believe we need to pull every troop out of every single area? No, we're going to have a footprint in Korea. We're going to have a footprint somewhere in the Middle East. But can we close probably 75 to 80% of the bases tomorrow and still have the same capabilities? We shift certain assets? Of course we could. So if what I'm hearing correctly is we need to close overseas bases, and what I heard was bring those troops and redeploy them home, where actually they'll be working and spending money in our communities and bettering our communities, I'm 100% behind this, and You know, I'll turn it back over to him in case I misunderstood what I was hearing there.
No, I mean, you're generally, I would really look at closing our military footprint altogether. That was going to take time, but it's not an overnight thing. But here's what I do want to say to people who have served. I have many friends who are veterans, okay? The reason why I'm anti-war to begin with is because I had friends who were in the military service, and I particularly with the war in Iraq, because the war was based on what we now know is extremely faulty intelligence and very cherry-picked intelligence, that I thought it was wrong to send them to war. One of my good friends in high school, his name was Joey Bosey, and I remember this. He signed my yearbook in our senior year with, make sure you look out for me on CNN while I'm representing Snellville, Georgia and Brookwood High School out there in Baghdad. And all I could think is, why? Why do you need to go there and fight there? You're a good person. You want to serve this country. Why do we have to send you to a war that you don't need to be fighting? And so I think I'm respecting veterans when I'm saying we don't need to be sending more people to war to become injured veterans. I see my friends coming back home with injuries, physical injuries that you can see, and then a lot of injuries that you don't see. One of my good friends, Tom, came back from his third tour in Afghanistan a broken man. He had seen things that would make the average person crumble. And because of that, he had a real tough time readjusting back into the world. And I got to see that. But I also got to see what happens when he gets the mental health care he needs, when he finds himself an awesome partner in his wife, and becomes a family man. I've seen that transformation. I want to see that transformation for more veterans. And when you mention helping our veterans with VA care, I think we can improve the way we take care of our veterans. And as a minarchist, somebody who believes in the minimal amount of government, I think actually one of the few legitimate expenditures of our government is to take care of our veterans who have offered to serve and defend this country. And so what I would do for the VA is say this: if you want to go to the VA hospital and continue in that program, yes. But if there's a hospital closer to you that can give you that service so that you don't have to drive hours, because there are people, I talked to people in Iowa at the Iowa State Fair, driving 2 hours to go get their VA medical service when there was a hospital just across town. Frankly, I think we should be able to pick up that tab, go to the hospital across town, write it off to the federal government. You've served your time. We have that obligation. And again, I don't like to spend taxpayer money on most things, but that's one of the few ones that I 100% say is legitimate, to treat our veterans with respect and give them the health care, both physical and mental health care that they deserve. And I don't think that conflicts with the idea that we need to have a more peaceful foreign policy, and we need to save those troops, those Marines, those soldiers, those airmen. We need, and seamen. Right. We need to see her. Thank you. I pulled a Rick Perry and I couldn't. It was not coming out. And our Guard and our Coast Guard, all of them, every branch of the military, even Space Force. Now that we have them too, cannot forget Space Force. But we need to be insisting on a foreign policy that does not put them into a battlefield first as the first option, which is what we did post 2001 when we authorized the war on terror. That should be a last-ditch thing. And also, I do want to have our troops home more, to be able to serve our communities at home. That's why I support Defend the Guard legislation that empowers governors to tell the federal government, you are not to take our National Guard out of the state unless there's a declared state of war. And why? Because I remember in the early 2000s when Katrina happened, hearing the stories about it would be really great if the Louisiana National Guard was here with their helicopters to rescue these people from rooftops, but they're deployed in Baghdad right now. What is the Louisiana Air National Guard doing in Baghdad? They're the Louisiana Air National Guard. They need to be in Louisiana. And so, that is something that, and so when I looked at Defend the Guard legislation and wanted to make sure that our National Guard stays here, to serve our communities here, when there's an emergency or an attack or something like that, that's serious to me. I've never served in the military, but God knows I have respect for people who do. I'm the grandson of a Korean War vet. My grandfather, his values are the values that run through me today. Without him, I would not be the man I am today. And part of that was him serving our country in the military. I'm very proud that he did it. And I am not somebody who, because I am anti-war, I'm anti-troop. In fact, I think being anti-war for me is a way for me to say I love the troops and respect them enough to not send them to a war they need to go fight. And lastly, I do want to say, geez, man, lost his eyes and his legs, you said?
That's a true story.
Jeez.
That has been brought up in the campaign, just kind of like, We went a little bit deep there. You
No,
know, on the whole family
but,
and
but
friends.
no, it's worth knowing those kinds of stories. I hear stories from vets all over the country. As a candidate for president, I am obligated to hear their stories and put them right here and to carry them with me. Because if I'm going to be president, that means I'm going to be commander-in-chief of all these folks, and I never put on that uniform. And so if I'm going to be a civilian leader of the military, I better respect the people that put that uniform on every single day, and I will. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in the American Legion. I would say that any day of the week to anybody. And in fact, I was in Indianapolis, and I was sitting outside with some friends, and an elderly gentleman and his wife came out to talk, and our friends were like, "Hey, you got any questions? This guy's running for president. Feel free to ask it." And he came up to me and he said, "I'm in my 80s. 50 years ago, the government decided to send good men like me to go fight a war in Vietnam. And a lot of good people died in that war. My only question to you is would you use the draft to send our men and women to go fight a war in Taiwan if China invaded Taiwan?" And I said, I won't. I won't. I will not send good men and women to fight in a war that we're not directly threatened. And so, and that's kind of how I feel about it. We should be sending our troops to war when a war is declared and only when our national security is threatened.
Does that mean that the military should only be a draft, volunteer military?
If I could get rid of the draft, I would, because I think it's immoral to conscript people. But you know, if there is, and I understand that that's an idealistic position and probably would never ever pass through Congress. That's my personal position. But you know, my position might change if we get invaded by somebody, right?
But Vietnam was a war that was fought by essentially draftees.
Mhm.
And these were people who had no stake in society and had no way of getting a stake in society. Okay? Now, I'm ex-military.
Mhm.
I was a volunteer. I had a department in the academy. Okay? At one time, I thought I was for a volunteer army or volunteer army. I'm not. It's a duty of citizenship to serve. Now, it does not mean you have to be military. You can do AmeriCorps, Teacher Corps, you know, whatever. But that's my personal belief, that everyone who can serve, men and women, should realize that there's something more than them. And that means, you know, getting involved in their society. You know, and I think that if you advocate strictly a volunteer force, you're repeating not World War II or Korea, but you're repeating Vietnam, possibly in the future. It's an obligation of citizenship.
Well, I will disagree with you on compulsory national service. It's just, and that doesn't mean that I don't think there are great people who work in AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, and do lots of these things. I just don't think that needs to be like required for citizenship, or some people say you should have to serve in some sort of national service to be able to vote.
Well, but I didn't say anything.
I know you didn't, but some people have advocated for something similar to that.
The whole reason we volunteer and serve is so others don't. You know that, I know that. I mean, in my opinion, and I don't mean to cut you off here,
Feel free, man. You are a veteran. You can probably
But,
talk a little bit more about that than I can.
we shouldn't be out here, the government, choosing who's gonna do what job where. That's my only concern with any type of compulsory service. I don't feel that as a government, we should be doing that. The whole purpose is to let people live their lives. People talk veterans, and again, we're all the same team. People talk about veterans and they hype it, but the whole point of everything out there is so this illusion here works. So the people here can do what they want. They can walk out the street, they can pick a job, they can go do anything they want. So I would personally really have a problem with some sort of compulsory service for the government that you have to take A, B, C, D to do it. That's just me, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the question.
But part of the problem is that we have politicians at all levels, and particularly at the national level, who could potentially send daughters and sons of any of us in here to war, okay, and they've never served. Now, if you have in any capacity to society,
So,
to get rid of, I'm sorry, to make that.
So you're taking more of a training in case they ever get drafted?
No, I think there should be, some compulsory service for every young man and woman at a certain age.
So-
They can choose it 2 years, 1 year, whatever, so they recognize they are part of a society and they're part of something greater than them. Because until people get invested into their society, their country, their community, they will always be out there saying, you go serve for me.
But it's also possible a nudge would work better than compulsory.
Well, there's also this. People who are active, right? You don't need to have compulsory national service to care about your community, to do things. You know, you could be somebody who starts a business in your community and you employ people in your community. You're being invested there. You could be a teacher. You go to school to become a teacher, and you're now invested in your community as an educator. Those don't require compulsory service. Now, there are lots of ways where you can contribute. You know, and like, you know, I got my start working in restaurants, like I said, being a dishwasher. And, you know, it taught me the value of a hard day's work and understanding what labor is all about. But I also volunteered at my church. I volunteered for a food pantry. I do, you know, in every Thanksgiving I participated in feeding the unhoused, you know, as part of just community service and being involved in my community. It was never compelled of me. That was just the values that are instilled in me. Now, are there people who aren't going to have those values? Sure, but I also don't want them to be trying to do the serving stuff because they're not going to do it with the same vigor, they're not going to do it with the same enthusiasm.
That's something that may not necessarily be true.
True, you're right.
Because some people are out there and they don't do this, but because they are unaware of it.
Mhm.
But when they get involved, they say, oh, there's something else besides me.
So we should promote those things. We don't have to make them compelled, but we can promote them. We can talk about those things.
Okay.
And in fact, I think that is something that, I mean, it's a value that I've instilled in my nephews and nieces, the value of hard work, the value of, you know, respecting the community. I just don't think that has to be compulsory. But I do understand what you're talking about, that if people had more skin in the game in their communities, they'd be more apt to be active and aware of what's going on in their community and be active members of that community. So I agree with you on that. I just don't think it necessarily needs to be compulsory. So we can kind of agree and still disagree there on that one. I'll take one more question here and then I gotta wrap things up, you guys. You can ask it if you want. But if somebody else wants to ask a question, if you haven't asked a question yet, please feel free to. Otherwise, I'm just gonna default to this table over here because it seems like there's a question coming from over here. Going once, going twice, ask. All right.
Okay, I'm gonna go for my hardest one.
Feel free.
Okay, so I grew up in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
I still have family in Maine. I think we're all aware of what happened in Maine.
Yes.
Definitely of the opinion that I felt like it was a place that would never happen. But now it has. And it happened about 20 minutes from where my sister lives with her family. I know there's a lot of opinion within the Libertarian Party that's more of a spectrum about gun control or gun ownership or just what is happening in America right now. But I think that we can't ignore the fact, much like we can't ignore what's happening in our environment around us, we can't ignore the fact that there is something going on within our communities that is resulting in these unfortunate events where a lot of people are being killed. If you were to be elected president, how would you address what is happening across our nation?
Thank you for the question, because it is one that is very much in the news right now. And it's no surprise that as a libertarian, I'm a very big defender of our Second Amendment. I love owning guns, and this comes from a place like my first gun I owned was when I worked at a bar, and I had to leave the bar at 2 in the morning with $200 worth of cash chips in my pocket and walk 4 blocks back to my car in downtown Atlanta. I felt more safe because I had friends who had been mugged. A reminder, by the way, violent crime still near historic lows. You're still more likely to be mugged at gunpoint in 1973 than in 2023. So we do have to keep that in perspective, but we're talking about mass violence, mass shootings. And these are things that have grown exponentially over the last 25 years. First, I have to say it's not the guns. And here's how I know this. My mom loves to tell me stories about how they had a shooting club in her school when she was in high school, and they would have students show up with bagged rifles in their arms, they'd put them in their locker, they'd go do their school day, and then they'd go pick up that rifle and they'd go shoot at the football field, they'd do target shooting. And so there were dozens of rifles at any one time in my mom's school, yet no one ever got shot. And so it's not the guns. We've always had guns, and in Maine they've always had guns. The X factor is what has changed. And I feel like, particularly since Columbine, which happened in '99, onto today, it is the rise of two things. One, it's the rise, and I know this is going to sound boomerish for me to say, it's the rise of social media. It's the fact that you can now get on a computer screen, you can put a fake name, a fake avatar, and you can spill all sorts of horrible bile online and dehumanizing language and troll people and say all sorts of horrible things that if I said it to Dave's face, he'd probably clock me. But if I hide behind an anime picture and put a fake avatar up and say, he don't know who I am. And so that's what we've allowed social media to do, is to dehumanize each other, to where we no longer have human empathy for one another. And when you dehumanize each other, that allows violence to break forward when you feel aggression, right? Second part of that equation is the fact we've had a massive rise in the use of psychotropic drugs to treat mental health in this country. And we need to examine the cause and effect of that, because that is something that has definitely changed in the last 25 years exponentially along with that rise. And we need to know if there is a correlation, that, if that causation is correlated. And I think it is something we need to examine. I also think we also need to look at alternatives to treat mental health. Things like MDMA therapy and psilocybin therapy, which, by the way, for veterans in the room, does an amazing job of treating PTSD and other things that many veterans have not been able to access because it's federally illegal. And I think we need to do away with that so that veterans have the most therapies as possible. But I do think those are the two real X factors that have led to this rise. Now, what can a president do to fix that? Well, not a lot directly to fix that. But what we can do is we can start having a little bit more human compassion for each other in our neighborhoods. This is not something a president can fix. Again, all politics is local. This is not going to be fixed by a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. or a president in Washington, D.C. This is going to be fixed by you in your neighborhoods, talking to your neighbors more, having more empathy in your community, and getting out and knowing people. Like you said, go out and talk to your neighbors. A lot of people in this country don't even know who their neighbors are by name. We need to get back to a community-based thing. And this is one of the things why I'm against big power in the hands of the federal government, because it removes our ability to care about each other at the local level. And so this is very much in line with my libertarian philosophy, that as we retreat power from the federal government, we bring it back to our own lives or our own communities, we're going to have more human empathy for each other and hopefully more peace amongst our communities. Lastly, we have to stop letting too many places be targets for these would-be shooters using gun-free zones. I do believe that if you're a teacher and you are trained, you should be able to carry a gun and protect you and your students if possible. I do believe that we need to have more first responders. Not only am I a gun owner, I'm also a stop and bleed certified person, so I know how to pack wounds, I know how to use a tourniquet, I know how to be a responsible person, so that if a shooting happens, it's not just me responding with my gun, but being able to take care of anybody who might be injured. And so those are steps that I think we can take at the local level to really increase more understanding with each other, have more empathy in our communities, and really hopefully lead to more peace. But I don't think any of that's going to happen from a candidate for president other than my own neighborhood. So if I'm elected president, I guess I can get to work on that in Washington, D.C. with my neighbors. I guess I'll have, does the president have neighbors? I don't know. But we'll figure it out, right? But that's what we need to do here in communities just like this, here in Northern Virginia. That's what we need to do in communities all over the country, is get back to knowing each other a little bit more, and when we do, we're less likely to be violent with each other. And that's the real X factor that I think changes. It's certainly not guns. And a reminder, by the way, rifles are responsible for less than 3% of all gun deaths in this country. So ending them will not end gun violence in this country. Most of that's happening with handguns, and the Supreme Court's already pretty much ruled that handgun bans are unconstitutional. So good luck with that.
But Second Amendment most times is misinterpreted. They think there's only two parts. There's actually three parts, and the middle part is the people. The first part is a well-regulated militia. A militia is a state function, okay, which means they're called by the state to do a duty, and when that duty is over, they are disbanded. I mean, everything for the militia, when it exists, is provided by the state, okay? And the last part, of course, is the right to own a weapon.
Shall not be infringed.
But that does not mean that the government can't put well-regulated, well-thought of restrictions on gun ownership. And that's where most people who are against some sort of gun legislation, that's where they seem to hang their hat.
Yeah.
Which, personally, I don't understand.
I'm sorry, but thank you for all the questions that were outstanding.
So, I just want to
So
say,
real
guys,
quick, we're losing people because it is getting later than I expected behind you. I'm watching them quietly go out the door, the food's over there, we gotta get more food out. So I do want to I'm gonna turn it over for a closing statement to Chase. Personally, I'm gonna keep it quick on my end. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I am, as many of you know, I was kind of worried with 5 days notice when we even have 10 or 15 people. It's been a great turnout. So I want to thank everybody for the time taken. I want to remind everybody that Steve really wants to spend money on my campaign. So please see him and make a donation of some sort before he can get out of here. You
He's
know,
been good,
so
man.
let's push it, and let's push for this guy.
So-
Again, he's come all the way out here to speak to us and fall first. I think that's huge, and I appreciate that. I'm gonna turn it back over to you for
Absolutely,
closing,
sir.
but thank you, sir.
And I want to say thank you very much for coming on out here. Thank you for hearing me speak for a little while. Thank you for giving me some great questions. Again, if you do want to donate to my campaign, you can go to the website. You can text Chase to 21,000 right now.
Let Steve know so it
Let
cuts
Steve
out.
know so that we can kick that back to Dave. And I want to say thank you for this turnout here. Please translate that to turn out for this man on his election on November the 7th. Get out and vote for Dave Crance. And if you are a member of the Libertarian Party, I hope you attend our convention. It is March the 2nd in Charlottesville. Come on out. I hope you become an Oliver delegate, and we have a full Oliver delegate slate going to Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.